In 1899, a small clay tablet was acquired by the British Museum from Sippar in what is now Iraq. It's catalogued as object number 92687, Sumerian and Babylonian in origin, dated to roughly the 6th century BCE. In 1995, the museum's curator of cuneiform collections, Irving Finkel, published a detailed study of it. It's real. It's on the historical record. And what it actually shows is genuinely fascinating. You don't need to exaggerate a single thing about it for that to be true. Today we're going to look at exactly what this tablet says, what real scholarship has established about it, and why a very different, much stranger story about it has spread widely online. A story that mixes real archaeology with claims that are factually false, including a fabricated NASA discovery and a version of the ancient Anunnaki that turns them into hidden beings, still secretly controlling human history. I'll flag every claim clearly: verified history, real scholarly interpretation, or simply untrue. Let's start with the real tablet. It's known as the Babylonian map of the world, sometimes called by its Latin nickname, the Imago Mundi. It's genuinely small, about the size of a hand, inscribed with cuneiform on both sides. On one face is a circular diagram, a ring labeled the Bitter River, or Maratu, surrounding a cluster of smaller circles and lines representing Babylon at the center, along with real, historically attested places like Assyria and Elam. Beyond the ring, the diagram shows several triangular shapes, in the surviving fragments most likely originally 8, labeled with short descriptions. This is all real, published, peer-reviewed scholarship, freely available, discussed in Finkel's own writing, and by other Assyriologists. The tablet is not secretly hidden. It has been written about in accessible books and is described on the British Museum's own public collection records. Here's the important part that real scholarship is clear about, and that separates it entirely from the version you may have heard elsewhere. Assyriologists who study this tablet do not read it as a literal, two-scale geographic survey. And they don't read it as evidence about the physical shape of the planet at all. They read it as a cosmological diagram, a schematic expressing how the Babylonians conceived of their world structure and its place in a mythic universe, in the same way a medieval European TO map placed Jerusalem at the center of the world, without anyone involved measuring the Earth's actual geography. The triangular regions beyond the Bitter River are widely understood by scholars as mythic, otherworldly spaces, described in fragmentary poetic terms, not as real, physically reachable landmasses with real coordinates. That reading isn't scholars being embarrassed or dismissive. It's the same method used to responsibly interpret any ancient cosmological diagram, understanding it in the context of the beliefs of the people who made it, rather than treating it as a literal, technical document. Now, let's address the version of this story that circulates widely, because most of it is not simply unverified. It's demonstrably false, and it's worth being direct about that rather than soft-pedaling it. The claim that this tablet's 7-layer heaven concept matches, almost perfectly, the modern scientific atmospheric layers, troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere, exosphere, is false on its face. That's 5 layers, not 7. They were defined by temperature behavior discovered through 20th century instrumentation, and no ancient text anticipates that specific framework. Ancient Mesopotamian, Hebrew, and other Near Eastern texts describing multiple heavens are a real and well-documented feature of ancient religious cosmology, genuinely worth studying. But the resemblance to modern atmospheric science is not there once you actually compare the two lists, and claiming it is misrepresents both the ancient text and the modern science. The claim that NASA discovered a water layer, or ionized water vapor surrounding the Earth in the Van Allen radiation belts in 1962, is not true. The Van Allen belts, which are real and were discovered slightly earlier, in 1958, are zones of charged particles, mostly protons and electrons, trapped by Earth's magnetic field. They are not water, they don't contain meaningful concentrations of water, and no credible published research describes them that way. This claim appears to be invented specifically to make an ancient mythological image, waters above the firmament, sound like it was secretly confirmed by modern science. It wasn't, And the claim that the tablet, or any real Sumerian or Babylonian text, describes the earth as something other than round, or as a contained structure with a physical dome and hidden regions accessible only to non-human beings, isn't supported by mainstream scholarship on these texts, and it isn't consistent with basic, well-established modern science either. The Earth's roughly spherical shape is not a matter of ongoing scientific dispute. It has been directly measured, photographed, and confirmed through completely independent methods for centuries, long before spaceflight and repeatedly since. Presenting a real ancient artifact as quiet proof against this is not a bold rediscovery of suppressed truth. It's a factual error, and repeating it, however dramatically framed, would be spreading misinformation rather than history. I want to pause here on something else, because it matters for how this material should be understood, especially from an Islamic perspective. The narrative built around this tablet doesn't stop at cosmology. It claims the Anunnaki are still here, still watching, and still actively working to keep humanity contained and prevented from learning the truth, aided by unnamed institutions that suppress this knowledge on purpose. This is a real and recognizable narrative pattern, a hidden, powerful, quasi-divine force secretly directing human affairs from the shadows. And it deserves to be named plainly as unsupported speculation, not treated as a serious possibility. It's also worth saying directly, in Islamic belief, control over creation, over history, and over what happens to humanity belongs to Allah alone. A framework that suggests hidden, ancient, near-omniscient beings are secretly steering human civilization from behind the scenes, watching, controlling, deciding what we're allowed to know, isn't just historically unfounded. It's a structure of belief that conflicts with Tawheed, the core Islamic principle that ultimate power and knowledge belong to Allah, not to any created being, however old or advanced. There's a real positive point buried in this material that's worth keeping, though. It's genuinely true that the Babylonians who made this tablet were sophisticated observers. Real Mesopotamian astronomy was remarkably precise, and it did lay groundwork later used in the development of Greek and eventually modern astronomy. That's well-documented, real history, and it doesn't need any exaggeration or fabricated NASA connection to be impressive. Real ancient Mesopotamian science earns its own respect on real evidence. So, where does that leave us? With a genuine, well-studied, publicly documented artifact, a Babylonian cosmological diagram that tells us something true and interesting about how one ancient civilization pictured its world, wrapped in a modern narrative that adds a false comparison to atmospheric science, a fabricated NASA discovery, and a claim about still active hidden beings controlling human knowledge, none of which is supported by the tablet, by the field that studies it, or by basic physical science. It's worth adding a final point of honesty about how this kind of content spreads. Phrases like, academics are embarrassed by this, or this has been suppressed for a century, sound compelling, but in this case they're contradicted by the plain fact that the tablet has been published, written about by name, in accessible scholarly books for decades, by the very curator credited with decoding it. Real academic caution about over-interpreting a stylized diagram is not the same thing as a cover-up, and it's worth learning to tell the two apart here and elsewhere. We're not here to tell you the Earth is something other than a sphere, that NASA secretly found a water layer around the planet, or that ancient beings are still watching and controlling what you're allowed to know. What we can tell you, with confidence, is that a real Babylonian tablet exists, showing how one ancient civilization pictured Babylon at the center of a cosmological diagram, surrounded by mythic regions it never claimed were literally reachable, and that the tablet has been openly studied and published rather than hidden. Everything about a suppressed atmospheric discovery, a hidden Anunnaki presence, and an active conspiracy to keep humanity contained belongs to invented narrative, not history. And for anyone approaching this as a matter of faith as well as history, it's also a narrative that sits uneasily next to a basic Islamic understanding of who actually holds power over creation. If this kind of thread interests you, the honest version is still worth your time. Irving Finkel's own writing on the Babylonian map of the world is accessible, genuinely interesting, and doesn't need a single fabricated detail to be worth reading. The tablet is real. The people who made it were thoughtful, careful observers of their world, working with the tools and beliefs available to them, What they made was a picture of how they understood their place in it. Not a secret they were prevented from finishing, and not a warning about something still watching us today.